During the afternoon session, the board held a joint meeting with the Planning Commission to look at the changes made to the general plan update, a document not everyone was completely happy with.
Well, here we are in the millions of dollars later, 10 years later, and now we went full circle. We're right back to starting the discussion of, well, what do we want in this document? I think it's a little bit late for that.
We've got half the communities in the county, or a third, that have come forward and are included, but we don't have Compshe or Leggett or Branscombe, Westport, Albion, Little River, Point Arena, Elk. So, you know, to me, it underscores the concern voiced by Commissioner Calvert, and I think one or two others, about if we're just concerned about getting through this process and satisfying the state, then we don't need to clutter it up with all these little individual community plans. And the policies in most of them say the county shall encourage, support, consider, should. So it's all very tentative and tenuous, and we could make progress right now by deciding to eliminate those, with the possible exception of Anderson Valley, which actually put some work into it. The rest of them, my understanding is the public meetings that were held were very sparsely attended. And what wound up getting written was written by the consultants.
The board also once again rolled out plans to deal with the enormous $8 to $9 million gap the county faces June 1st. But first clarified for the CEO what the process will be for the hiring freeze.
So one of the items that we're looking at is that we would preliminarily run all requests to fill by the General Government Committee. The General Government Committee would then make a recommendation, which would then return to the board.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm concerned that we have a moving target here. The interpretation of what a hiring freeze actually is seems to change with every meeting. And again, at the last meeting, it's my understanding that staff clarified that any new hires would come to the board. I'm looking at this.
That was a board direction. Yeah, that was real quick.
And staff confirmed that. My suggested language simply confirms what we seem to understand, that for now, new hires will come to the board.
But the CEO's office and staff is going to have to sit down with each department and say, look, where are we starting from here? What can you do without? What can't you do without? And it really doesn't have a lot to do with mandated services, because, as I said, that would devastate the Department of Transportation. Totally, basically wipe it out, because nobody's coming and telling us that we have to maintain 1,000 miles of road.
I cannot stress strongly enough that the only way we're going to get through next year is we have to start negotiations with our bargaining units again. There are a couple of bargaining units that have COLAs scheduled for next year. At DSA and management, I think we have to sit down and talk about those kinds of issues. You're not going to balance the budget unless you start negotiations with your union groups. I think we have to talk about some permanent implementation having to do with reduction in hours for our employees and correspondingly reduction in compensation. We took 12 days in 6 months. That's helped us get through 4 million, but we got 8 million on our hands. So you can eliminate programs, but now you're talking about eliminating staff.
When you take across the board MTOs, the people that get hurt the worst are the people at the bottom of the structure. And I've been arguing here for 10 years now that we need to pay attention to this in hard times, and I never get a hearing for it, because those who make the decisions, which is usually the administration, are the ones that are reluctant. I would propose here that we examine what happens when we do an inverse progressive reduction of pay for those who are making under $25,000 a year, $25,000 a year or $35,000 a year don't get hit. Those who are making, let's say $165,000 a year, they get hit not 12 days, they get hit 20 days, and you could factor it on out through that.
In probably the most intelligent cost-cutting measure, John McCowan discussed combining redundant divisions.
But questions have been raised to me about why we have information services in GSA and also in Health and Human Services. Is there a possibility to combine that? I'd like to see staff take a very serious look at that, and if they think they can't be combined, then that should be brought back to us.
I don't think it's a question of is it Supervisor McCowan's specific suggestions or is it Supervisor Colfax's. I think that we're going to have to employ both of those as budget balancing strategies. I think this board is interested in looking at executive pay compensations, the high salaries we have. Can we afford them in these times? And as Supervisor Colfax said, the inequity in applying the kinds of cost savings measures that we're going to have to impacting adversely the lower paid categories of employees, and how we keep the doors open and how we get essential services to people that need them. And so I think that's going to be incumbent upon us to really to look at what executive pay is. And as I said yesterday, clearly the Board of Supervisors is not in anywhere even close to the executive pay structure of this county.
As the day wore on, the board seemed frustrated by the CEO's presentation of options.
If you're looking for what actions you might be considering taking, and I don't know, I don't think we're your only item before adjournment, but probably the biggest one, it would be to look at the options. There are 3 options there, and the one recommended by the CEO is option number 1, and either modify or recommend, select one of those.
Don't you feel that with the discussion here, that the CEO's office has got pretty clear direction of where we need to go on this?
Not necessarily. You were speaking about not liking the across the board, which was option 2. So as long as the discussion kind of keeps them all in play, but if you want to just say, hey, let's go with option 1, then you're done.
Well, I support the option of looking at eliminating some programs
And
right
that-
from the get-go.
Okay.
None of this biting around the edges.
Okay,
Let's
that's
get
in all
right to the
3
meat
of
of the
them.
pie. And
That's
that's
in
not
all
one of
3.
the options here.
No, that's in all 3 options. It talks specifically about,
Okay, we want to wind this down here. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've stated before I'm not a fan of the across-the-board approach, and I think that it is the responsibility of the executive office to bring us a laundry list of specific programs and positions that they would recommend for cuts. If we need to make $8 million worth of cuts, we probably ought to get $10 million worth of suggestions, and it's our responsibility to work through those and make the decisions. I think it's passing the buck to say, just cut everything 10%.
could I ask a clarifying
I
question?
want to go to Supervisor Brown here.
That's just a comment I'd make, that if the gap were smaller, I think starting out with status quo
Let
could,
me
but a
interrupt.
large gap.
Let me interrupt
Yeah.
first, Ms. Glassy. I'm not talking, again, maybe we need to look at the time frame of
Yeah.
the budget construction. I'm not thinking that they're going to get to the end run by the time this process is taking place with the executive office. In other words, I'm not assuming they're going to do a complete budget and then those discussions begin.
And in the last gasp of the day, CEO Tom Mitchell attempted to gore another sacred cow.
I was looking at LAFCO's proposed budget for next year, and I do have some concerns about the county's contribution, and we're looking every place to try and cut at the county level, and I'm not, when I see some of the expenditures in their budget, I'm concerned that, and I thought perhaps if the 2 board members that are on LAFCO, we could just talk about some things. I'm not sure if they need that full contribution from the county of the $65,000 that they're asking for this year based on what I see in their reserves.
Yeah, not being on LAFCO, but remembering the amount of resistance from some of the fire districts and special districts and so forth. I think you're grabbing a tiger by the tail and be ready to get your hand bitten off.
This is Tamara Drake for UVTV. Check back often for more local news.